Main motivation for deciding to take my students into the archives came, first of all, from my own experience in the archives as an undergraduate. I did some work with the university archives at my undergraduate institution and learned a lot, not only from the experience, but from the information that I collected. I felt sort of connected to my campus and my community in a really different way. And I wanted to find a way to recreate that for my students in English 15, but then with the added challenge of trying to make it relevant for the writing classroom and trying to find a way to give them this research experience that would tie directly to what they're learning about writing and would tie to sort of improving their writing skills. One of the biggest issues that I think a lot of students have in 15 is trying to decide a topic to work with for their papers. I think a lot of them feel like they need to work with something that seems important or has some sort of cultural currency, which is great. And a lot of times they end up doing valuable research and learning about current events, but they, in a lot of cases, start to feel sort of like their voice doesn't really matter in this conflict. And I get a lot of like, well, I'm, just an 18-year-old college student, so how do I really write as myself when none of these people I'm trying to participate in this conversation with would actually listen to me or would actually ever read anything that I've written? And that struggle is sort of hard to overcome with some students who really feel like they want to write in a voice that's their own, and they want to sort of get at these issues that they think are important, but negotiating that kind of ethos can be challenging for them. So that's been sort of one of the best parts about doing this archival work, is that my students get to go in and they get to do this very different type of research that introduces them to a new set of skills in that respect, but then they sort of become the experts on the topics that they're working on. And it's directly tied to their own experience, because I have them in the university archives, so they're working on something tied to Penn State or the State College community. And that way these topics are directly connected to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis in the community that they sort of exist in. So I recommend that the students sort of think about a topic that's tied to something that they're doing. So a lot of them will go in and try to sort of research the history of a club or an organization that they're involved in, research the person that a building they spend a lot of time in is named after, research something about their department or a faculty member, something about a sports team that they're either a part of or if they follow regularly. I've had a lot of projects on Beaver Stadium that have turned out actually much more interesting than I thought they would. But they can really then sort of think about something that is a part of their daily life and get at the history of it. And they become they become the resident experts on these issues, and they get to come to the classroom with information that no one else has. Their classmates don't know this information, their instructor doesn't know this information, and so they really get to take ownership of it. And they get to sort of think about, okay, how do I present this history? How do I represent these people in a way that is responsible and ethical, but also that's interesting and that really proves the importance of this element of history in some way. So their writing projects take a couple different directions. They work on sort of just a general kind of research project where they're uncovering this piece of history and trying to make it relevant for a current audience. But then I have them develop it into some sort of contemporary argument. So think about, okay, let's look at that group in the past, but let's look at that group now. And what issues are they still facing? Or how can we take this sort of past conflict and translate it over into a current conflict? And how can you use that historical information to inform something that's going on now? So they think about engaging with current issues in a different way, because they sort of start from this place where they're looking at this past material, they're looking at these old documents and these old photos, and they then have to think about, okay, how does that remain relevant now, and how can I use this sort of past information to illuminate something that's going on in the present? And I think that sort of translation of ideas gets them to come at an issue from a different direction, and oftentimes has really sort of productive results in terms of the arguments that they're making. They're a part of this community, so of course they get to write about it. And it's very natural for them to sort of talk about personal experiences and talk about personal connections and admit personal connections and think about ways that the relevance of this information in their personal lives actually gets to become a part of their argument, rather than something that they kind of have to shadow over or sort of ignore. And I think that process is really helpful for a lot of students in terms of just gaining confidence about their own voice as a writer. I have a lot of advice for instructors who would like to use archives. I think the biggest challenge is just figuring out how to prepare your students for the experience, because going in and sitting down in a soundproof room where you can only have a pencil is a little overwhelming, and then the volume of information that they can deal with is equally overwhelming. There are folders upon folders and boxes upon boxes, and it's hard for them to figure out how to approach that because it is so unfamiliar. So I think you really have to think about taking the time to prepare them for that experience. The university archivists are incredibly helpful and have given presentations to all my classes that go over the sort of rules and regulations for working in the archive, but also to introduce them to the kinds of material that are available in our university archives. But in the classroom, one of the things that I've learned from doing this for a couple of semesters now is just to start talking about it as early as possible. I've sort of, in most of my classes, been dealing with the archive stuff later in the semester, but I've this semester started to talk about it on day one and started to tell my students, okay, this is something that we're going to be doing, and get them thinking about it, because the first couple of times I did this, the students were overwhelmed and couldn't pick a topic, or had a lot of them, it took them a while to pick a topic, and some of them ended up kind of just landing on something because they found a folder but they weren't quite satisfied with what they had decided to work on. So I think the earlier you can get them thinking about something, the better that choice will be. And so I told my students now, for the first month and a half or so of class, we're not working on this project yet, but I want you to have it in the back of your mind, and I want you to walk around campus, and I want you to think about what's going on here that I would like to know more about, what kind of history is here for me to uncover, and just to have them really sort of think about their day-to-day experiences in that way, and to walk around, start to ask those questions, so that when the time comes for them to actually choose a topic, they've already generated some ideas, and then the task of going into the archives is a lot easier. It's a lot easier for them if they can go in and say, I would like to find some information that's related to the history of the badminton club, rather than just to go in and say, I don't know, hand me something. So I think the more you can do to prepare your students for the experience, the better off they'll be, and the easier it'll be for them to really get started.